My Lords, the issue is raised of trust. That's extremely important, clearly. I think it takes trust. Trust takes two. The EU's action on vaccines on Article 16, the immediate resort to legal action to try to stop people in Northern Ireland from going on holiday to Great Britain with their pets, also are not actions that are conducive to trust. We don't want a relationship with high levels of mistrust. The current problems in the relationship are caused by the extreme difficulties in operating the protocol reasonably, and if we can get to a better protocol, we will have resolved some of those problems, and that is why we are trying to proceed by consensus and get to a better situation. The issue of people in Northern Ireland is raised. Of course, the protocol itself requires there to be no impact or minimised impact on the everyday lives of people in Northern Ireland. That the fact that that is not being observed is one of the major problems with the current situation, and that is why we wish to see if we can resolve it in a sort of negotiated way. The issue of the veterinary agreement is raised. We have made clear what our position is on that an agreement by equivalence could solve the problems, but actually what we are proposing in this command paper is something more fundamental. It is dealing with the fundamentals of the difficulties rather than the problems, and our proposal for a dual regulatory zone with appropriate processes backing it up, and one of those things could be a veterinary agreement, will resolve these issues in a more fundamental way. The issue of Article 16 is raised. We set out the thinking on that, of course, in the command paper, and it is a very legitimate tool for use within the protocol. That's why it's there, and we made clear that the situation would justify, if we wish to, use of Article 16 both to deal with the current issues arising, for example chilled meats, parcels and so on, and also the broader arrangements under which goods enter Northern Ireland from Great Britain. But we have chosen not to go down that route. We prefer to proceed by negotiation, and I hope we can. A few final points, if I may. The issue of the United States, I've seen the comments from the US State Department spokesman overnight, in which he urges everyone to solve differences by negotiation and protect the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and we absolutely 100% agree with that, and that is what we have set out today. The issue of stability in Northern Ireland is a very important one. Business needs stability. The problem is we don't have stability now. And anyone who heard the comments from the chair of Marks and Spencer's this morning and seen his letter will be very clear of the kind of extreme difficulties that businesses will face if we simply proceed without trying to rectify the situation. We don't have stability now. We need to produce a solution that will generate stability and get us forward into the future. So, my Lords, we look to make proposals. We have made proposals that set out a negotiated approach. They are significant, they are substantive, they offer a good chance, in our view, of resolving difficulties on a durable basis, and we very much hope that the EU will look at them, consider them carefully, and go forward with us on that journey.
We now come to the 20 minutes allocated for backbench questions. I ask that questions and answers be brief so that I can call the maximum number of speakers. Lord Jay of UM.
My Lords, I'm grateful to the Noble Lord the Minister for giving evidence last week to your Lordship's committee on the protocol which I chair, and we greatly look forward to future such meetings too. We will, of course, study the proposals and the white paper carefully. Meanwhile, I have one question for the Noble Lord the Minister. He spoke about trust. Could the Minister confirm that the government will do all it can to build, or perhaps I should say to rebuild, the trust between the British government, the European Union and the Irish government that is essential if we are collectively to find a resolution to the protocol that is in the interests of all communities in Northern Ireland and which they profoundly deserve?
My Lords, I actually very much agree with those comments. I could spend time, but won't, in looking at the origins of the situation and why the situation of mistrust has been established. I don't think it's helpful to do so today. We're looking forward. We have to deal with the situation as it is. And a very clear proposal to proceed by negotiation, to proceed by agreement, to proceed by discussion will, we hope, begin to help re-establish some of the trust which is lacking, it seems, on both sides.
Lord Kane.
My Lords, rigid and theological implementation of the protocol has severely disrupted trade, adversely impacted consumers, has hit businesses in both Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and has contributed to political instability. In welcoming my noble friend's statement, therefore, does he agree that it is now the time for the EU fully to respect Northern Ireland's position within the UK internal market, along with the constitutional and economic integrity of our United Kingdom? Failing that, can I assure my noble friend that he will be entirely justified in taking whatever unilateral action is necessary to remedy the current unsustainable situation, and in so doing will have the strong support of many of us?
I thank my noble friend for his comments, and he's obviously absolutely correct in saying that the place of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom, in its single market, in the customs territory, is protected on the face of the protocol and is absolutely fundamental, and it is the doubts that have been allowed to develop on that subject that are part of the reasons why we face the situation that we do face today.
Baroness Ritchie of Downpatrick.
My Lords, in light of the absence of trust caused by the original internal market bill last September and the unilateral extensions of grace periods in March, how confident is the noble Lord, the Minister, that the EU will have the appetite to consider such a fundamental departure from the protocol in terms of Article 5? After all, the UK government negotiated, agreed and ratified the protocol.
My Lords, obviously we will have to see how the EU reacts to these proposals. I hope they will consider them seriously as a significant proposal to find a durable settlement. It is true they are significant changes to the protocol text and will require that, but we hope that the EU will see that the prize of a settlement which is durable and which allows us to move on is worth the process issue of reopening the protocol text. We must keep our eyes on the prize and what we're trying to do here.
Baroness Gowdy.
My Lords, the trust is clearly broken and must be repaired. The protocol would have not been necessary, but it is now, and it is an imperfect solution to a problem unnecessarily caused and created. It does, however, avoid crippling blow to the peace process that a hard line border would have represented and would represent. And it does contain special measures to protect human rights and equality until someone suggests a better solution. Also, my Lords, it is vital as part of the Good Friday Agreement that investment would be coming to Northern Ireland. And this, I hope that this government will continue to encourage with the other partners of the Good Friday Agreement. Can the Minister give me an undertaking that this is still happening, and what plans has he got to take it further? And working with our colleagues in Europe and the United States.
My Lords, we're obviously ready to work with anybody, and our plans are in train to encourage investment into Northern Ireland. I believe there are some events in prospect in the next few months. I think the noble Baroness is right to call the protocol an imperfect solution. I think it's very clear it is imperfect. I would say, as she does, that much of the protocol is not in question. Issues such as common travel area, human rights, the Good Friday Agreement, and so on, those are not controversial. What we've got to do is make sure that the trade arrangements and the governance arrangements of the protocol work better, and the proposals we've put on the table work with the concepts in the protocol to try and achieve just that.
Lord Empton.
My Lords, today is not the day to enter into a discussion on how we got into this mess, but one particular fact is clear. The businesses and the people of Northern Ireland are the innocent victims of a situation which they did not create and did not want. With that in mind, can I turn to my question, my noble friend, which is, are we seriously, as a government, going to look at real alternatives that are capable of resolving these issues within the concept of the Belfast Agreement, which I believe has been completely demolished by the current protocol? We want new arrangements that are workable, coherent and long-lasting, and will bring the stability that businesses and consumers in Northern Ireland urgently need.
My Lords, I very much agree with the thrust of my noble friend's comments. The proposals we have put on the table are, I think, significant and pretty fundamental in the way that they would adjust the way the trading arrangements of the protocol work. They're intended to be durable. They're intended to do something different, significantly different to what is done now. But as I say, we work in these proposals with concepts of the protocol. We've not swept it away. We don't agree that the right thing is simply to scrap the protocol and that nothing need fill its place. We believe the right thing is to work with the grain, use the concepts, but use them to make sure that the arrangements work in a significantly different fashion.
Lord Purvis of Tweed.
Lords, decisions made by the Boris Johnson government, not the EU, over the last year has meant for the first time in our history, a government of the UK is compelling UK businesses who trade within the UK to Northern Ireland to register with the government as an exporter. Any goods from GB to Northern Ireland will have to be separately conformity assessed and separately labelled. And this month, new parcel and shipping taxes for consumers set by a foreign power are now being paid by people over which we have no representation whatever. There is no mention of these in the command paper at all. Does that mean that businesses are going to have to live with this unacceptable and outrageous burden on UK businesses trading within the UK?
My Lords, we have put out in the command paper the very high level elements of the approach we wish to pursue, and of course we want to discuss the detail with the European Union, including in many areas. What we are proposing is an extremely light touch measure to now allow trade to flow freely within the UK customs union and within the UK single market, and we think that is a reasonable response to the situation that currently prevails.
Baroness Noakes.
My Lords, I very much welcome my noble friend's statement, and I hope that the whole House will join me in praising his huge efforts to try to make our relationship with the EU work effectively. Does my noble friend agree that the guiding star should be what works for the citizens of Northern Ireland? And if the EU could shift to a people-centric approach rather than a rule-centric approach, we could start to make some real progress.
I very much agree with the thrust of my noble friend's comments. The impact of the protocol on everyday lives in Northern Ireland is a significant part of the difficulty. And again, if one looks at the comments from the chair of Mark Spencer's, we see the risks to everyday life. For example, the risk of not being able to deliver supplies for Christmas under the current arrangements. And I don't think that's what either the European Union or we actually want in this situation. And if we can focus on the practicalities and the reality of the situation and try and find a way through, we'll all be the better for it.
Lord Dodds of Duncan.
My Lords, clearly the Northern Ireland Protocol is not fit for purpose. It's not working or delivering for Northern Ireland. And your Lordships, if any of you visit Northern Ireland, talk to people, you will know that immediately. And the Noble Lord the Minister has done that frequently. Whatever the benefits are, they're massively outweighed by the disadvantages in economic and societal and political terms. But can the Noble Lord the Minister assure me that at the end of this process of renegotiation, or if direct action may be necessary by the government, that we will end up in a position that the new balance of arrangements will restore Northern Ireland to its proper place with no Irish sea border and with elected representatives of the people of Northern Ireland, either here or in the Assembly, having the final say over the laws that govern Northern Ireland?
My Lords, it's clear that the balance that we have in the protocol is not working at the moment, and I've explained why, obviously on many occasions. I think the issue raised by the Noble Lord is one reason why we think changes to the governance arrangements in this protocol are so important. It simply does not fit with the reality of the situation to have laws imposed and policed by institutions outside the UK territory and subject to judgments from a court that is not a court of the UK. And if we can agree that, and I recognise it is a significant point, I think we will find some of the problems raised by the Noble Lord beginning to melt away.
The Earl of Connaught.
My Lords, there are 32 committees set up under the TCA and the withdrawal agreement, only 3 of which are directly relevant to the Northern Ireland Protocol, leaving 29 that are not, presumably now 30 with the overnight news on Gibraltar. Does the Noble Lord the Minister share the concerns that many have that the trust problems that are taking place within the Northern Ireland Protocol might leak across to these other 30 forums, which would be most unfortunate? And if he does share those concerns, what is the government doing to address that?
My Lords, I do think that where there are trust problems between us and the European Union, they stem from ultimately from the issues that we have on the protocol, and I 100% agree with the Noble Lord that we must try to nip that in the bud and stop it getting in the way, in a durable way, of the rest of the relationship. The issue of Gibraltar that he raises obviously is a dispute about a different issue. Obviously there are analogous elements, but I think it's important to keep these things separate. The mandate that the EU agreed yesterday does seem to be problematic in a number of ways, as my right honourable friend the Foreign Secretary made clear yesterday, but I don't think it makes sense to connect one thing with another. We deal with each of these issues in their own terms and try to proceed in a constructive way.
Lord Thomas of Gresford.
My Lord, 7 months ago, the Noble Lord the Minister negotiated and signed the protocol and presented it to the British people as a triumph. Today, he stands at the dispatch box and says, it's rubbish, doesn't work, we've got to have something better. My Lords, wouldn't the best way of resolving the trust problems to which he referred, the first step, be for the Minister to resign for a gross failure of government policy for which he is personally responsible?
So, my Lords, the protocol, of course, was agreed nearly 2 years ago now, and a lot of water has flown under the bridge since then. We are saying, and we continue to say, that it needs improvement. We have experience that elements of the protocol are not working well, and there is nothing wrong with trying to improve elements of a treaty. It happens all the time.
Baroness Hurry.
thank the Noble Lord for his time spent in Northern Ireland, listening to people, and for the recognition that the protocol is not working and can't work. And I do welcome the proposed changes, particularly the importance of removing Northern Ireland to being subject to EU rules and the EU court without any say. But could the Noble Lord, the Minister, give us some idea of timescale in terms of just how long these negotiations might go on before it is felt time to actually do something more drastic? Does he agree with me that if the European Union really is concerned about peace and stability in Northern Ireland, then they will respond positively to these proposals and respond very speedily?
My Lords, there are plenty of deadlines in this process already, and I don't want to add to them by generating others. We have proposed, and I will write shortly to the Commission proposing a standstill, and obviously if a standstill can be agreed, it will take away some of the significance of the end of the expiry of the current grace period. So I very much hope we will be able to do that, because obviously if we can't, the 30 September deadline is not very far away, and we don't want to be faced with the same situation that we have been faced with before on chilled meats, and have to focus on solving the cliff edge problem rather than dealing with the fundamental underlying problems.
Lord Lilly.
My Lords, I welcome my noble friends' practical and forward-looking proposals and deplore the backward-looking point scoring of both opposition front benches. Can my noble friend confirm that although the EU and its apologists in this House claim that the protocol requires rigid application of all EU rules and checks on goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain, in fact, Article 6 says the Joint Committee shall adopt appropriate recommendations to avoid controls at the ports and airports in Northern Ireland to the extent possible. So if the EU refuse to respond positively to his proposals, they will be in breach of both the letter and spirit of the protocol.
My noble friend, as always, makes a very good point. The issue of the requirements in Article 5 and the requirement in Article 6 to avoid checks and controls is of course one of the areas where you can't just read the protocol straight. You've got to look at the purpose, and you've got to look at the way its different provisions interact. It's certainly arguable that the Article 6 provisions commitments are not being delivered upon, but we have not so far sought to argue that, because the protocol is a political and purposive document, and we believe that the right way to solve the problems arising is in a political way, rather than immediately reaching for legal arguments and processes.
Care of Kinlochard.
This is serious business, my lords. Our Queen's name is on this treaty that we now want to change. The Minister correctly points to precedents for changes to treaties, but I can't recall any precedent for our condoning, still less ourselves proposing, unilateral action if we don't get a negotiated change. The other side don't agree. 3 particular questions. Precise answers, please, Minister, now or in writing. First, on good faith, how do you square with the treaty's Article 5 our continuing refusal to allow the EU access to the customs database as we said we would? Second, on goods at risk, how do you square your honesty box proposal with what the protocol's Article 5.2 says about onus of proof? And 3, finally, on Article 16, safeguards, which the Minister mentioned, which UK exporters would the government expect to be hit by EU rebalancing measures under the protocol's Article 16.2?
My Lords, on those 3 points very briefly, we do allow access to the databases. We have recently agreed enhanced access, and we have a discussion in train to allow further access. We have no difficulty with access to data. Indeed, our own solution requires quite wide access to data to provide reassurances. It's certainly true on the second point that what we are proposing is not consistent with Article 5 as it stands. That's why we need to change it. Our system is, what we are proposing is I guess a trust and verify system, which is perfectly normal in business and in these arrangements, and we think it will work very well in this context too. And on Article 16, I think I've set out where we are on this issue. We hope that it will not be necessary to use Article 16. We're trying to proceed by agreement, so hopefully the contingency evoked by the noble Lord will not arise.
My Lord, the time allowed for backbench questions on this statement has now elapsed. I will allow a minute for changeover and will then proceed with the rest of the business.
We're getting more of a voice. You're in yellow. I know, I can't help it. Yeah.
Can you move on? The House to be again in committee on the Skills and Post-16 Education Bill. Minister.
My Lords, I beg to move that the House do now again resolve itself to be a committee upon the bill.
The question is that the House do now again resolve itself into a committee upon the bill. As many as that opinion shall say content, the contrary not contents, the contents have it. Amendment 90. After clause 25, Amendment 90, Lord Willis.
My Lords, I wish to move Amendment 90 in my name, a new clause which provides for the review and updating of the terms of higher education loans and repayments every 5 years. And before I briefly turn to that, can I just say to the House and to the Minister that it is much appreciated the government has set aside 4 days for consideration of this important bill in committee. This is actually the last amendment that I will be moving, and so this is the right moment to thank her for her engagement with the issues. And I just wanted to assure her that all the amendments I've brought forward are aimed at improving and helping the government achieve its policy objectives. But I realise that there may well be a reaction to this amendment, a very understandable reaction, that higher education finance is so difficult and so controversial that the last thing we need is a provision to look at it every 5 years. But in reality, because the system is so important in the public finances and so politically charged, it is being changed and has been changed in an ad hoc way from time to time. And what I try to do in this amendment is provide some framework so it can be reviewed and updated systematically, looking at the system and the interactions between the parts of it as a whole. And this new clause would also tackle a belief, I think it's misconceived, but there are people who hold to it, that somehow the system can't be changed at all. The terms on which the student loans company deals with students and then graduates makes it clear from the beginning that regulations for the terms of repayment can be amended from time to time. And of course, there are advocates of a graduate tax, and this current repayment scheme in many ways is rather close to a graduate tax, a 9% tax on earnings above a certain threshold, but with a cap on the total amount. A graduate tax would clearly be with adjustable rates. So this establishes the reality that the terms of the scheme can be adjusted and altered and should be done with a proper systematic overview from time to time. It also enables the system to take account of legitimate political debate about the balance between the amount that we expect graduates to pay back for the cost of their education and the amount we expect taxpayers to pay by virtue of writing off unpaid student loans. And there's genuine and legitimate debate about what that balance should be. Different people of different political persuasions can take different views on what the balance is. And it's also affected by things such as the performance of graduate earnings. I don't think it's now breaking any confidences when I say that when we set the graduate repayment threshold of £21,000, when we brought in the £9,000 fees, it was based on a rather different forecast of graduate earnings than actually happened. So as earnings overall grew by less, the repayment threshold ended up being higher than had actually been envisaged in real terms. Those are the type of economic scenarios which ministers are rightly should be able to consider, and they should be able to change the system in the light of them. What we have had in the last few years is a range of ad hoc changes, of which the most significant, I have to say, I think the most egregious, was the one in 2017, with a very big increase in the graduate repayment threshold, a sudden and large increase, therefore, in the taxpayer cost of the loans that weren't being written off, which was introduced with no consultation, no wider consideration for the system as a whole. In fact, I have to say, a case study in the perils of policy making by conference speech crisis, which is not a good way to decide how our higher education should be funded. So I very much hope that this approach, which provides for every 5 years, there should be an overall review in which clearly the terms of the loan scheme can be looked at in the light of economic and political considerations. This provides some kind of framework. The Auger review, which is a serious piece of work, a lot of it I agree with, is one kind of example of how that could be done, and the minister might cite it. But circumstances change, debates change. And rather than having a once-off specific exercise like that, I think every 5 years being able to look at what has happened to the so-called RAB charge, the loan repayments, looking what has happened to graduate earnings, adjusting the system in the light of public spending pressures and other issues, I think makes sense. And it doesn't stop people doing anything else. There will be some people in this House who believe that the whole system should be swept away. That's their view. Nothing in this provision changes their capacity to do that if they bring in primary legislation. And equally, ministers may still want from time to make changes. But this just provides, rather as in the historic social security system, this just provides 5 years, every 5 years, a systematic overview with the opportunity to look at all the evidence and decide in a structured way how the system could be recalibrated. And I think it legitimizes the absolute necessity of keeping the scheme adjusted. It provides a framework for doing so, and I hope will improve the quality of our ability to scrutinize and improve our higher education financing system as it goes forward. That's why I propose this new clause.
Proposed. After clause 25, insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list. I call Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I must first apologise for my absence from this committee on Monday, particularly to the noble Lady Baroness Sherlock and the noble Lord Watson of Invergowrie, whose amendments I'd signed. It was entirely due to an administrative foul-up on my part. But I speak today in support of the noble Lord Willett's amendment, which in some ways reflects what's happening now in an ad hoc way. It was back in 2018 that Philip Auger was asked to review what was happening with student fees. In January, we had a interim response from the government on that. But according to The Guardian, at the start of this month, we're going to get the full government's full response soon. We're looking at a 4 or 5 year kind of time period, the same thing as is proposed in this amendment. Now, what we're hearing about the debate that's going on behind the scenes before we get that response is talk of tuition fee cuts, a cap on student number for certain courses, and minimum qualifications, which are all designed to lower the cost to the government of financing the student loan system. Now, the fact is that when tuition fees were set at £9,000 in 2012, the intention was to have inflationary increases each at regular intervals. But since it was raised to £9,250 in 2016, the fees have remained at that level, while the real value has declined by 12%. It's notable in this context, as the Noble Lord Willett said, that this is an intensely political issue and decisions are very likely to be made in an ad hoc, highly political way. I think it's interesting that apparently the reports suggest that the Treasury is seeks to directly cut fees and increase repayments, while other parts of government favour more indirect means, such as minimum entry requirements and course caps. And I think we really have to think about that latter approach in the context of the bill we're debating now, which is focused on the need for more skills, more education. Yet what we're expecting sometime soon is a proposal from the government that will actually squeeze down, reduce people's access. And I do think we have to look at where we are. More than £17 billion is being loaned to students each year. The value of outstanding loans is reached £160 billion, and it's expected to be £560 billion by the middle of this century at 2020 prices. 75% of students will not repay their loans. That means a whole generation, half a generation, half of the people in one single generation, going through life with that 30 years with that weight resting on their shoulders. And we're in a situation now where and stressing the need for this review. If we think about COVID, this descended on us, society changed enormously, and we don't know in this age of shocks what changes will be arriving in future. Now, the Noble Lords of Willets reflected that the government would probably not welcome this amendment, the whole issue of fees being so difficult and controversial. But I would agree with the Noble Lord's reflection that this magnifies the need for a systematic, planned, guaranteed measure of review. You could even argue that this makes it easier for ministers. With this on the face of the bill, this is a review that has to happen, is set into the government timetable. The practical reality is what we have now is a fantasy. They're called loans. Most of the money will never be paid back. We do need to reflect as a society on the fact that education is a public good and it should be paid for from general progressive taxation, not weighed on the shoulders of individuals in situations where those who earn the most can actually, by paying off their loans fast, pay the least. We're in a situation where we need change. This amendment won't do that, but it does at least create a pause, a chance to think, a requirement to think about what we're doing to our young people and their future. Thank you, my lords.
I call Baroness Sherlock.
My lords, I thank the Noble Lord Willets for introducing his amendment and the Noble Lady Baroness Bennett for her reflections and also for her courteous but quite unnecessary apology. Lords, the current arrangements for student loans are really now quite complicated. A recent House of Commons library brief gave a lovely timeline of all the changes from 1990, when the first loans were introduced for student support, then just £420 a year. It then tracked the developments as loans gradually replaced grants for maintenance and the shift from mortgage-style loans to income contingent repayment schemes. And then, of course, loans for fees started and some maintenance grants came back. The big shift, of course, was in 2012, when fees trebled and the current system was put in place. The effect of this pattern showed up when I was chatting to a member of our small opposition staff team recently. She had compared notes with a couple of colleagues in her office and realised that despite the three of them graduating not so many years apart, each had a different package of debt and repayments. And I think part of the reason for the complexity, of course, is the system has so many moving parts. So a government wanting to save money has a range of ways to do it. They can change the size of the original debt, as they did dramatically in 2012. They can change the repayment threshold, as the government did in 2016 when they decided to stop tracking earnings and freeze the threshold till 2021. although that went down so badly they changed it again, not just unfreezing the threshold, but raising it to 25,000 from 2018. They can change the contribution period. Indeed, Augar recommends raising it to 40 years. They can change the contribution rate. I mean, it's still 9% for undergraduate degrees, but of course, loans for master's programs came in 2016 and PhDs in 2018. So that rate can now go up to 15% of earnings above the threshold for postgrads. Or they could change the interest rates. Indeed, they're spoilt for choice here. They could change the rate while studying, the rates when repaying, or change one or both of the lower and upper thresholds. And each of those changes or combinations has a different distributional effect. Now, I take from his introduction that the Noble Lord Willits wants a periodic systematic review, and he made his case for that. What does amendment mean that changes could only be made then? I suspect that may affect the government's interest in it. I suppose one benefit of a systematic approach would be the opportunity to ensure that factual information was gathered and disseminated about the impacts of changes to the system. Does the Minister agree with me that work is needed to ensure that the student loan system is widely understood? After all, if governments are going to make changes to student finance, it's vital it's not done just by sleight of hand, banking on the HE version of fiscal drag. It's crucial that the differential impact on people with different likely lifetime earnings is made crystal clear. After all, my lords, if the state is advancing 17 billion a year to higher education students in England, and if we're now talking the value of outstanding loans of some 160 billion this year, the least the government owes the country is transparency and a good public debate. Does the Minister agree?
Minister Baroness Berridge.
My Lords, I'm grateful for the amendments made by my noble friend and grateful for his thanks. It's a pleasure to engage with noble Lords, and this is my first piece of legislation in your Lordship's house, and I hope that this is the shape of things to come in terms of the tone and the reaction to this piece of legislation. With £19.1 billion paid out in student loans in the financial year 2020-21 and further increases forecast for future years, it's essential that the government keeps careful control of the student finance system. It's also important that the government retains the ability to review and make changes to the student finance system as and when needed without potential delays or a focus on a process that a requirement for a review every 5 years could impose. I appreciate the comments from the Noble Lord Willits, but inadvertently a process may, as the Noble Lady Sherlock outlined, become constraining, although the process was introduced with the best of intentions. We must ensure that the system can remain responsive to the needs of the labour market and the wider economy, and thus continue to deliver good value for students and the taxpayer. As the Noble Lady Sherlock outlined, yes, we agree there is a need for transparency, and we do make available a wide range of data on student loans and repayments that's regularly produced and made publicly available, which enables the government and, of course, other interested parties to monitor the student loan system, including regular publications from the Student Loans Company and the Higher Education Statistics Agency. The government has updated the student loan offer in recent years, as the Noble Lady Sherlock outlined, with the introduction of several new loan products, including loans to support postgraduate and doctoral study, and we will continue to make changes as and when necessary. Through the bill, the government is also enabling the introduction of a lifelong loan entitlement that will open up new routes for people to retrain and upskill flexibly throughout their lives. And in relation to some of the questions raised by the Noble Lady Bennett, the fee cap of £9,250 is frozen for this year and the next academic year. And in relation to what she made reference about the burden, well, the responsibility obviously is to repay a loan, but 30 years at the moment is akin to many of the mortgage products that are available on the commercial market. As the Noble Lord Willits correctly predicted, I take this opportunity to remind Noble Lords of the recommendations regarding higher education, including on student loans and graduate repayments, that were made by the independent panel appointed to provide input to the review of post-18 education and funding. The government is carefully considering these recommendations before setting out a response to the review, along with the comprehensive spending review. So in conclusion, although I'm sorry to disappoint my noble friend Lord Willits for the second time in recent days, I hope that my remarks have reassured him, as I know this has been an issue of concern to him for many years, but I do hope that he will feel comfortable in withdrawing his amendment.
Lord Willits.
Grateful to the Minister for her courtesy, as always. I don't think my score on the amendments that I have been tabling to this bill has been very high. And I will, of course, withdraw this amendment. However, I do hope that it's possible to come back and consider this further. And I'd like briefly just to comment on the interventions we've had. I mean, Baroness Bennett came from her perspective, and it was interesting, and I much appreciated the fact that she also made the case for some kind of structure for a review every 5 years. And Baroness Sherlock, I can assure Baroness Sherlock and indeed the Minister that there's nothing here that stops specific changes at specific times. We have had a lot of those, and that might well carry on. But what I am trying to provide for is something more systematic every few years. In fact, I'm trying to avoid the need for something like Augur. In other words, a special inquiry set up like that, when it should just be natural that every 5 years we look at what's happened to graduate earnings, we look at how much of the graduate loan book is likely to be repaid, we look at the terms of maintenance support, we decide if there should be any changes in the light of changing circumstances or indeed changing political priorities. It seems to me that providing that kind of health check on the system as a whole every 5 years is not to deprive ministers of power, it's actually to provide an opportunity for a wider, sensible public debate on a subject that is often seen as obscure, difficult and hard, when in reality it should not be, because it's of such public interest. As I said, I will not press this amendment to a vote today, but I hope that perhaps over the summer it might be possible to meet up with the Minister and consider with her this and some other amendments I've tabled, in case we can find a way forward which takes account of the legitimate concerns she's expressed. But I hope also she recognises that the amendments I'm bringing forward are aimed at improving the system in line with the government's own policy objectives.
Does the Minister wish to respond?
Just to say, I'd be delighted to meet my noble friend at a convenient point.
In light of Lord Willett's comments, is it your Lordship's pleasure that this amendment be withdrawn? Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to the group beginning with Amendment 90A. Anyone wishing to press this or anything else in this group to division must make that clear in the debate. After Clause 25, Amendment 90A, the Lord Bishop of Durham.
My Lords, I beg to move Amendment 90A in my name. I'm grateful for the support from Lord Addington and Baroness Morris of Yardley. On these benches, we welcome this bill as the first step in implementing the much more significant role that further education needs to play in transforming the lives and life chances of individuals, communities, and of wider society. Quite properly, it's chiefly concerned with structural or technical issues. The House has done its usual excellent and thorough job of exploring large numbers of these through the 4 days spent in committee. The bill deals with what one might call the supply side of provision, aiming to make it more responsive and adaptable to the needs of employers and communities, for example. Turning any vision into action is no easy thing, and I'm most grateful to the noble Baroness Berridge, for an extremely helpful meeting, including the issue of incentivising learners to take up the new opportunities which this bill seeks to increase. However, one of the crucial factors in radically increasing the take-up of the opportunities which should flow from such responsiveness is the provision of financial support for those who are unable to meet the costs of their studies because they are reliant upon state benefits, for example, if they're unemployed. I therefore also support Amendments 92 to 98, all of which, though in different ways, aim at broadening the range and scope of support for learners. As your Lordships will have noted, Amendment 93 also specifically refers to amending the universal credit conditions in a way that would permit full-time study. So there's already quite a wide degree of support for more flexibility in the benefit system to maximise access to skills, training and education. Turning to Amendment 90A in more detail, at present, the current welfare rules pose a major barrier to many people out of work to upskill or retrain, a situation which is not new. Historically, this was embodied in the 16-hour rule, but persists under the new universal credit system. For example, someone currently in receipt of universal credit will lose access to benefits if they take up the lifetime skills guarantee of a fully funded first level 3 qualification or other further education qualification. The Chancellor has invested in programmes in both the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Education to support 16 to 24-year-olds, but they do not currently operate in tandem and are difficult to make work for employers, for students or unemployed people, and for colleges. In addition, while support with tuition fees is one element in enabling people to begin their courses, living costs, the maintenance element, is often an even more significant barrier, a matter often discussed in reference to students in higher education, but just as much a problem, actually if not more so, for students in further education. I fully recognise that the government has begun a significant programme of very substantial and complex work over the student loan system and the LLE, and that joint work is already underway between the DfE and the Department for Work and Pensions, and I'm most grateful to the Minister for having shared some of those issues and their proposed solutions with me and with colleagues. We appreciate that there are also significant complexities, technical, practical, and legislative, in embodying detailed provision for student financial support in primary legislation, which those of us who participated in the scrutiny of the Higher Education Research Act and its cousins will be all too well aware of. And I'm most grateful to the Noble Baroness for the information in her recent letter about the lifelong learning entitlement amendments tabled on Wednesday, and the invitation to a briefing on the matter in that recent letter. However, the purpose of this amendment is to give the Noble Baroness an opportunity to assure the House that the government is committed to reforming those aspects of the benefit system that may act as barriers to the participation in gaining new skills or increasing their present skills as our post-COVID society will need. I would welcome further discussions with her or with officials as the government's proposals are developed. At this stage, subject to those assurances, I will, of course, leave this as a probing amendment, but there I leave my comments.
Amendment proposed after clause 25, insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list. I now like to call Baroness Janka.
My Lords, I speak in support of Amendment 93 in the name of Lord Storey and myself. And as the Right Reverend Prelate has already said, the amendments in this group deal with finance and incentives to take up the training and development opportunities within this bill, and also the disincentive posed by universal credit to take up these opportunities. Amendment 93 seeks to change the current situation of people who are unemployed and wish to follow full-time training courses to improve their job prospects and give them entitlement to universal credit, from which they're currently excluded. This is because those receiving universal credit, as has already been explained, have obligations to prioritise job searches and take available jobs to prioritise them over full-time training. In addition, the length of time that people can continue receiving universal credit while undertaking work-focused study has been capped at 8 weeks. People taking up courses on offer would have to give up universal credit. They would have the choice as to whether to take up chances of reskilling or to have enough money to live, eat, and pay bills. Unemployed people or those on no paid jobs are the least likely to take out a loan, further risking indebtedness and poverty for themselves and their families. This bill is about the importance of training and retraining to support people and employers. And the government has rightly invested in traineeships, apprenticeships, and the Kickstart and Restart programmes. But these schemes have limited eligibility. Unemployment has risen in other age groups from the 18 to 25s, on which much attention is focused at the moment. But the people who would benefit from claiming universal credit are very often those who would benefit most from retraining and development. There is a lack of coordination across departments. To make this bill and the provisions within it successful, there needs to be appraisal by the DWP, and I would like to hear from the Minister what the government has done to consider the difficulties of people trying to take up courses when they are unemployed and have no other means of support. This Amendment 93 seeks to amend the regulations on universal credit to enable a more flexible and enabling approach to those most in need of retraining and development for decent jobs. It relates only to courses leading to the lifetime guarantee, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response.
I call the next speaker, Lord Addington.
So I can be fairly brief on this, as my noble friend has just done some of the heavy lifting on the amendment that stands in her name and that of my noble friend Lord Storey. My lords, universal credit is a benefit that's down there to help you. It's replacing a lot of things. But there are these problems about the fact that generally speaking, you're supposed to be looking for work and it seems to be excluding people from taking on training. This is purely an absurdity. If you are going to be trying to improve the skills levels of the nation, surely every time they are available to take that skilling, i.e. when they're not in work often, would be a good chance for them to do so. We need to get people better skilled. I hope that the government, when they answer this, will be able to tell us exactly how they are going to get these groups who are available to take the training and skill opportunity, because presumably some of them aren't doing anything else, to actually take part. And if you take away the foundation for them being able to live, you're actually stopping them. At the moment, my lords, this is not a new problem. At the moment, the benefit system is actually acting in many cases as a disincentive to upskilling. I would suggest that this is something we should be doing everything we can to change. And this is as good a time as any.
I'd like to call the next speaker, Baroness Greengross.
My Lords, I support the intentions of these three amendments. In essence, they allow people on universal credit to engage in study without being financially disadvantaged by doing so. The current situation creates a perverse disincentive whereby those wishing to upskill and gain qualifications, which may make them more employable, find themselves financially worse off as they no longer receive universal credit payments. Allowing people to study and gain new skills improves their chances of getting off a benefit and into employment. Whatever short-term savings the government makes not paying benefits to people who enroll in training courses is lost if the system incentivizes people to stay on universal credit rather than participating in education. One understands completely the desire to limit benefit numbers and further to encourage those who can work while studying to do so. But this needs to be carefully balanced with the need to encourage upskilling at a time when our workforce is changing rapidly and will continue to do so, in my view. This is an area the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Education really need to be working together to solve. Can the government outline what work has been done by both departments to date on this important policy area, and what steps will they take to ensure that universal credit policy isn't inadvertently discouraging people from participating in crucial skills training? Thank you.
To call the next speaker, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lord, it's a great pleasure to follow the noble lady, Baroness Greengross. And this group of amendments has already been very clearly outlined by the Right Reverend Prelate, who I think, to sum up, his contribution said, how could people better use their time while unemployed than by upskilling? And the noble Lord, Lord Addington, who said it would be absurdity not to encourage the unemployed to improve their skills. But I do feel like I should reflect back to, I think it was day one of our debates, when we talked a great deal about the need in our climate emergency and nature crisis to increase our skills. There's simply so much that we need. And people who are unemployed are obviously at a potential point where we can start to fill some of those gaps. I think the noble lady Baroness Janke made a very important point, that people who are unemployed are of all ages, from those just leaving school to those in their 70s and beyond who still need or want to work. And these are people who often have commitments to children, to rental or mortgage, to supporting older relatives. You can't assume that they're just a unit of labour that can be shifted around at will. And what we've seen is decades of wrenching economic change in many parts of the country that have only been amplified by COVID. I think it's worth looking at a study from the Institute for Employment Studies in June, which attempted to explain what seems to be a conundrum that's happening at the moment. We have a recruitment crisis, yet we also have parts of the country where there are as many 10 job seekers for each vacancy. And the average across the country is 2.2 people claiming unemployment benefit, competing for each vacancy. Almost 100 local authorities have 5 job seekers going for each role available. So people have to be able to make choices in their own interests, choices in the interests of the country, and leaving people trapped, employing, they know, pointlessly for scores after scores after scores of jobs they know they're not going to get. That is profoundly dispiriting, profoundly damaging. And we need to give people the option of finding another path forward in life than being trapped in that situation. Thank you, my lords.
I'd like to call the next speaker, Baroness Sherlock.
My lords, I'm grateful to all noble lords who've spoken and to air these important issues. The Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Durham, has identified some of the major barriers placed in the way of people who want to take up education and training to improve their skills. I wonder if the Minister saw the recent report from the Association of Colleges. It concluded that the current social security rules are actively discouraging people from getting the skills they need, a point reinforced by the noble lady Baroness Greengross. The report argues that if this isn't fixed, it will result in fewer people in stable and meaningful jobs, slower economic growth, reduced opportunity to meet employers' skill needs, and bigger tax burdens. Well, it's crucial a government policy is joined up with skills, employment, and social security policy properly aligned. And indeed, as the noble lady Baroness Bennett points out, that all of these are aligned with our overriding plans to deal with the climate emergency. Amendment 98 in my name is designed to probe whether the government has any plans to do this in terms of alignment by changing the rules on universal credit to support skills development. Most people who are studying full-time can't get universal credit, and there are exceptions if young people are doing A-levels or other non-advanced courses and they don't have parental support, or those responsible for children or some disabled people with limited capacity for work. But otherwise, people on UC face the kind of conditionality requirements mentioned by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Durham, the noble lady Baroness Janke and others. Specifically, unless they have an easement of some kind, UC claimants are meant to spend 35 hours a week looking for work and to provide evidence of this, which can result in some pretty dispiriting things of the kind the noble lady Baroness Bennett mentioned. Those claimants are allowed to do part-time educational training, but only if they can fit it in their spare time. In other words, fit it in around a full week's job search. Now, work coaches can make an exception if they think more training would help someone on universal credit to get into work quicker. But even then, the training should normally only be for a maximum of 30 hours a week, so the claimant can continue with job search in the remaining hours. So can I ask the Minister, in that circumstance, if a claimant were offered a full-time job, even a temporary one, would she have to stop the training and take the job? Even when you get full-time or nearly full-time training, it's normally limited to short courses, usually up to 8 weeks in England, a bit longer in Scotland and Wales. But there is a DWP pilot running till the end of October, where the maximum period is raised to 12 weeks for full-time work-related training throughout Great Britain and 16 weeks for skills boot camps in England. Can I ask the Minister, is this a pilot with a view to extending the time limit more broadly? And beyond this, it'd be really good to understand the government's plans for enabling everyone to get the skills they need. If the government wants to get everybody up initially, at least to level 3, and if they want people to train or retrain for jobs of the future, what are their plans for ensuring everyone can afford to do this? Because if some people can't afford to support themselves while they acquire skills, they risk being trapped either out of work or in low-skilled, low-paid jobs, which apart from anything else will keep them on in-work benefits probably indefinitely. Now, I realise this is something which falls between departments. If this were a DWP bill, I wouldn't be surprised for the minister to get up and say, it's not the job of the benefit system to fund full-time students. That's what student finance is for. But since the minister is responding from DFE, it'll be interesting to hear her take on how her department thinks people should be funded to acquire new skills. But above all, the government departments need to work together. I look forward to her reply.
I'd like to call the Minister, Baroness Penn.
My Lords, this group of amendments broadly seeks to enable individuals studying at level 3 and below to claim universal credit. And it may be helpful to Noble Lords if I set out the work already underway in this space, as noted by several participants in the debate. Officials at the Department for Education and the Department for Work and Pensions are working together. I hope the Noble Lady Baroness Sherlock will be reassured by that fact, to help mitigate barriers to unemployed adults taking advantage of our skills offers. In April, an extension to the flexibility offered by universal credit conditionality was announced for a trial period of 6 months. And so to answer a point made by the Noble Baroness Lady Janke about the 8-week cap for full-time training for those on universal credit, as a result of the trial underway, adults who claim universal credit and are part of the intensive work search programme can now study full-time for up to 12 weeks or up to 16 weeks as part of a skills bootcamp in England, building on the 8 weeks claimants were already able to train full-time. Such measures are helping to ensure that universal credit claimants are supported to access training and skills that will improve their ability to gain good, stable and well-paid jobs. Turning to amendments 90A tabled by the Right Reverend Prelate and 93 tabled by the Noble Lady Baroness Janke, which have a similar thrust, and so I will take together. Subsection 1, paragraph D of section 4 of the Welfare Reform Act 2012 sets out that one of the basic conditions of entitlement to universal credit is that the person must not be receiving education, which can be defined in regulations made under subsection 6. Financial support for students comes from the current system of learner loans and grants designed for their needs. Where students have additional needs that are not met through this support system, exceptions are already provided under Regulation 14 of the Universal Credit Regulations 2013, enabling those to claim universal credit. However, universal credit is not intended to duplicate the support provided by the student support system. And further, the paragraph referenced in Regulation 14 of Amendment 93 provides an exception to the requirement that a person must not be receiving education in order to be entitled to universal credit. That is designed to support care leavers aged 18 to 21 who wish to catch up on education they may have missed out on when they were younger, and makes welfare support available to them. We therefore feel it would be of benefit to maintain this regulation to continue to support this group of adults. In relation to Amendment 98, tabled by the Noble Lady Baroness Sherlock, and to the point raised by the Right Reverend Prelate and the Noble Baroness Lady Janke, that it's not possible to take advantage of the lifetime skills guarantee whilst on universal credit, I would point out that more broadly, an adult who is undertaking a course up to level 3 may still be entitled to universal credit. This is provided that their course is compatible with work-related requirements agreed with their work coach. Where the course is work-related and will give the person the best chance of securing work, the work coach may consider it a suitable work preparation activity. In such cases, time spent on the courses will be deducted from the amount of time the person needs to spend looking for work. To answer the questions by the noble Lady Baroness Sherlock in relation to this this principle, she is right though in noting that those on universal credit should not restrict their availability for work in favour of the course that they're undertaking. So they might need to be prepared to give up, or perhaps more suitably adjust the course that they're taking in order to take up work, for example, moving to a more part-time basis. The noble lady's second question was on the pilot of the flexibility that we've introduced for full-time training to last for up to 12 or 16 weeks. And we will evaluate the impacts of that extension before making any decision on the future of that, which, as the noble lady noted, the pilot runs till the end of October, and then we will look at its effects. My Lord, I hope I've set out that the government is already taking steps to ensure that the benefit system does work better for those who need to undertake training in order to improve their prospects of finding work. And as such, I hope that the Right Reverend Prelate is able to withdraw his amendment and that the noble baronesses will not move theirs when they are reached.
We've no requests to speak after the Minister, so I'm going to return to the mover, the Lord Bishop of Durham.
My Lords, thank you, Minister, for your reply, and thank you to all colleagues for comments around all three of the amendments that are in this grouping. I'm very grateful for all the insights that have been offered. Thank you, Minister, for outlining where work is already underway. That's very reassuring. It's also very reassuring to hear that DFE and DWP are working together to help mitigate barriers. And I trust that that will continue and deepen. And also the greater flexibility, which is already under trial. My reflection, though I have to say, Minister, listening to the complexity with which you had to cite sections, subsections, and so on of different bills in order to explain the system doesn't give me great confidence for the poor person who is trying to do a level 3 qualification, who's trying to decide whether or not they can get some financial support through universal credit. Now, I understand, of course, that the complexity of the law is a bit different from the way that a work coach might well approach it. But I think you illustrated one of the difficulties for young people and older people seeking to find their way through the whole of this system. Of course, at this stage, I will withdraw my amendment, but I hope that there will be evidence by the time we come to report of further work on the joint working with DWP, perhaps further consideration about where easing of this might occur for those for whom actually access to universal credit would make the difference completely about their upskilling for the future.
Assuming that the Minister doesn't wish to respond to that particular contribution, is it your Lordship's pleasure that this amendment be withdrawn? Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to the group consisting of Amendment 90B. Anyone wishing to press this amendment to a division must make that clear in the debate. After Clause 25, Amendment 90B, the Lord Bishop of Durham.
My Lords, I'm just getting to the thing. In its 2014 report, Sense and Instability, City and Guilds made a wryly humorous and powerful case for much greater coherence, much greater focus on building on success, and much greater attention to effective implementation in skills policy. With the white paper and this bill, along with associated developments such as T-levels, and we hope far more radical change to apprenticeships, it is clear that the present government is indeed moving in that direction, a trajectory which we on these benches fully support. This amendment seeks to make more concrete those policy ambitions by placing their funding arrangements on a statutory footing. The goal of joining up the wider education and skills system so that it better meets society's needs and gives people the skills they need is by no means an easy one to reach. It also requires that goal to be embedded in a long-term national strategy, most appropriately on something like a 10-year horizon. That strategy needs to sit across government so that it can more imaginatively bring coherence across departments, as well as giving greater stability at a college and local and regional level. Crucially, it requires a matching long-term funding settlement. It's already possible to see how this kind of cross-departmental approach can bring huge benefits, for example, in areas such as sustainability and the green agenda, tackling the recruitment needs of nursing and other allied professions, the major changes facing the automotive industry, and the significance of digital skills, all of which require colleges to play a major part in delivering the required skills to individuals, employers, and businesses. The need for such a longer-term strategic investment has been called for by the Education Select Committee. It's an underlying strand in the White Paper and is, of course, being signalled by the additional funding already released to colleges, as well as the lifetime learner entitlement already announced. The Auger report also signalled the clear advantages of treating HE and FE in a much more comprehensive way, and we look to see how the department intends to see that continue to affect policy. Clearly, much will depend on the comprehensive spending review and the continued impact of the pandemic on public spending. It would, however, be most helpful to have an indication of how such a long-term strategy is being developed, and as the amendment indicates, how that can translate into concrete recommendations and thence into long-term action. I beg to move.
Amendment proposed. After clause 25, insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list. I'd like to call the next speaker, Lord Addington.
My Lords, when government is asked to, have a long-term look at something, the usual answer is, but we are. It's generally what comes out, but we've got all these different things. But the advantage of the amendment, which I have signed by the Noble Lord Bishop, is the fact that it actually puts it in one nice, solid place and gives us three good bases for starting. I, of course, was attracted initially by the support for special educational needs, and I remind the House yet again of my interest in that particular bit of the playground. But, my Lords, looking at things regularly over a long period of time is something which actually is essential if a policy is going to develop. And just to go back to special educational needs, my Lords, there is a long development here about saying, of course you can, but here's a requirement on the way in. My interest in dyslexia, by the way, you've got to pass a written test in English despite the fact you've got God knows how many other qualifications. I remind the House of the number of hours I have burned up on that particular subject over the years. If you've got a way in, then how do you maintain that person? And does that maintenance and pattern keep up with both the understanding and the technology that's out there at the moment? That is a pattern of development that comes one after the other and will change over time. I would hope that the Minister, when she responds, if only on that particular aspect of this amendment, will be able to come back and say, this is the review process, this is where we're going in, and this is where we're looking at it. Because I am getting fed up with saying, by the way, you can do this a different way. And the government goes, oh, really? Then there's a series of rows going on, amendments, government time taken up, and then they realise. Don't allow yourselves to be only moderately reactive for once, as opposed to actually being dragged to the thing. Everybody does it to an extent, and a degree of moderate reaction is probably understandable. But making sure you are looking across this regularly and finding out what is possible will probably help you. Most forms of disadvantage, other than disadvantage, come in there as well. When you're actually talking about general training, the same types of principles apply. Can the Minister give us an idea of how regularly they are doing this? Not the case of they're looking at something and occasionally if something goes wrong or something is dragged to them, they will have a look then. Because that really will mean that you have this horrible process of trying to dig out why something's gone wrong. And here's an example. Oh, really? It's been there a while, and then coming back to it. Well, surely some way of doing what is suggested in this amendment on a regular basis without requiring politicians to dive in, jump up and down and cause the government to have a look and all governments have been guilty of this, my lords, all of them. How we can come back is really what I'd like to come out of this, because it actually is addressing a real and ongoing problem.
Let's call the next speaker, Lord Aberdare.
My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow Lord Addington, who's made such a valuable contribution throughout this committee. The government's skills-related goals, as embodied in the Skills for Jobs White Paper and this bill, are rightly ambitious and will be correspondingly expensive to deliver. The aims of skills strategy are necessarily long-term, and achieving them will depend on a complex web of specific policies and organisations, as has been clear from the debates that we've had in the committee. Ensuring that there is adequate funding in place to support all the activities involved across schools, FE colleges, universities, independent training providers, employers, local authorities, combined authorities, and of course learners themselves, and to ensure a fair balance between them all, will be an immense challenge for government. Amendment 90B, in the names of the Lord Bishop of Durham, Lord Addington and Baroness Morris, proposes commissioning a panel of experts to review and make recommendations on long-term funding for skills and post-16 education, building, of course, on the foundations set by the Auger Review, as well as the Skills for Jobs White Paper. It seems to me that this can only be helpful, if not essential, input to the government, along with the various consultations it is planning in addressing this challenge and getting the answers right. So I too look forward to the Minister's response and to hearing how the government plans to tackle the important need for a joined-up, long-term, fully funded skills and training strategy.
To call the next speaker, Baroness Wilcox of Newport.
My Lords, we welcome this probing amendment introduced by the Right Reverend, the Noble Prelate, the Lord Bishop of Durham, and supported by Lord Addington and my noble friend, Lady Morris. It's the opportunity to discuss the government's plans to introduce a longer-term funding settlement for further education, because the White Paper recognised that further education funding has been wholly insufficient, and that alongside increased funding, there is a need for simpler, as alluded to by Lord Addington, longer-term funding settlements which allow colleges to deliver on long-term strategic priorities, because their funding compares extremely unfavourably with both university and school funding. Annual public funding per university student averaged £6,600 compared to £1,050 for adults in further education. And recent research from IPPR has found that further education funding had kept up with demographic pressures and inflation over the last decade. We would be investing an extra £2.1 billion per year on adult skills and £2.7 billion per year on 16 to 19 further education. The result, my lords, of this underfunding is that colleges have had to narrow their curriculum and reduce the broader support they offer to students, careers advice, mental health services. 16 to 19 funding for catch-up has been woefully insufficient, and in order to deliver on the skills agenda, it is imperative that this bill is backed up by long-term, multi-year, simplified funding. It will require addressing the long-standing underinvestment of the college sector in the upcoming comprehensive spending review with serious long-term funding. It's otherwise simply not deliverable. But this must not come at the expense of HE funding. We want to see FE and HE collaborating rather than competing for resources, because destabilising university funding, cutting courses or capping numbers will deny students the brilliant education and experience that our world-class institutions in the UK have to offer. Denying young people's opportunities must not be the legacy of this government's approach, and ensuring parity of esteem between different post-16 routes is enormously important, but this is best achieved by investing in HE and not by taking funds away from HE and levelling down. Having an ability to access both further and higher education with investment that matches their ambition is the only way that the country can meet its skill needs and provide pathways into good careers today as well as jobs for the future.
I'd like to call the Minister, Baroness Penn.
I'd like to thank the Right Reverend Prelate, the Lord Bishop of Durham, for tabling his amendment. And I'm not sure on the substance of the debate we've just had. There's much disagreement between the government and noble lords. The government is committed to transforming further education so that everyone is able to access high value provision that is relevant to labour market needs and job opportunities. And as noble lords have noted, we've published the Skills for Job white paper in January, setting out future policy direction in this area. And over the past 2 years, we have invested significantly in post-16 education. At the spending round 2019, we increased 16 to 19-year-old further education funding by £400 million, followed by a further £291 million at the spending review 2020. So the direction of travel in terms of policy has also been matched in terms of the direction of travel in terms of funding. And in addition, we're investing £325 million of the £2.5 billion National Skills Fund this year to support adult skills and retraining. We are continuing our investment in the £1.3 billion adult education budget and the £2.5 billion apprenticeships budget. And we're also continuing our £1.5 billion multi-year capital investment in the FE Capital Transformation Fund. This funding is helping to deliver on the commitments made in the Skills for Jobs white paper and the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. Noble Lords have made the point quite rightly about longer term funding. However, funding beyond 2021-22 will be considered as part of the wider spending review later this year. In addition to what I've just set out, we have launched an extensive government consultation on reforms to the further education funding and accountability system to address many of the points made by the Noble Baroness Lady Wilcox. This consultation is a first step towards a funding and accountability system that will maximise the potential of further education and help us to build back better. We want to use the consultation to start a dialogue with the sector, employers and other interested parties on how government funding can be administered more simply and effectively so that colleges and other providers can focus on supporting learners to develop the skills they need. Similarly, in the interim conclusion to the review of post-18 education and funding, we committed to consulting on further reforms to higher education, including on future funding. We continue to consider the recommendations made in Sir Philip Auger's report, supported by an independent panel, and will conclude that review in due course. Furthermore, to address the points made by the Noble Lord, Lord Addington, we want all children and young people, no matter their background or special educational needs or disabilities, to reach their full potential and receive the right support. And that's why we are allocating significant increases in high needs funding, an additional £780 million in 2021 compared to 2020-2021 compared to 2019-20 funding levels, and a further £730 million in 21-22, bringing the total support for young people with the most complex needs to over £8 billion. In addition, the national funding formula for 16 to 19-year-olds includes extra funding for disadvantaged students. This is provided to institutions specifically for students with low prior attainment or who live in the most disadvantaged areas. Last year, the government allocated over £530 million in disadvantaged funding to enable colleges, schools and other providers to recruit, support and retain disadvantaged 16 to 19-year-olds and to support students with special educational needs and disabilities. We also applied disadvantage uplift through the element of the adult education budget distributed by the Education and Skills Funding Agency, increased funding for learners living in deprived areas. The AEB budget also provides funds to providers to help adults overcome barriers to learning. This includes learner support for those with financial hardship and learning support to meet additional needs of learners with learning difficulties. As outlined in the Skills for Jobs white paper, we will ensure those with special educational needs and disabilities continue to gain direct work-related skills alongside English and maths to increase their employability. And of course, the Noble Lord will know that the cross-government SEND review is working on identifying the reforms needed to improve support for children and young people with SEND, including those in post-16 provision, by working with system experts to design a SEND system fit for the future, drawing on the best evidence available. My Lords, given the breadth of measures already in train, and some Noble Lords may say that's a long list, I would say to Noble Lords that those are many elements of a concerted strategy that is moving in a consistent direction on the back of a number of reports and reviews that have sought to look at this on a long-term basis, whether you go back to the Sainsbury review or the more recent Auger review. And so whilst I completely agree with the need to take a long-term and strategic approach to this issue, I'm not sure a further review supported by an independent panel at this time is the right way to knit this all together, rather than the progress that we're making on delivering the important outcomes of a number of those reviews already undertaken. I therefore hope that the Right Reverend Prelate is able to withdraw his amendment.
I've received no request to speak after the Minister, so it's back to the Bishop of Durham.
My Lords, thank you. Thank you, Lord Addington. I knew I could rely